Hey guys, it's Heather. Love and light to all of you guys. Sorry I missed a couple days. I was just spending some time with some friends and family and stuff like that. Tonight I wanted to talk about the next season of my life, which was entering into a divorce. That was a struggle. Um, for me, as a Christian woman, um, I had fought 2 years prior, trying to save my marriage, trying everything that I could prayer, devotion, serving in the church, doing whatever I could to try to save my marriage. And it ended up not happening. Um, After 2.5 years, I ended up going to a Ash Wednesday service with my friend, and I had been praying, and I had gotten to a point where I was so exhausted. That night, I went to the service to get the ashes on my forehead, and I remember the music being so beautiful, and I cried pretty much through the whole service. And toward the end of the service, when I went up there to go get ashes, I remember I prayed to God, and I had said, I just want you to turn these ashes into beauty. I can't do this anymore. I'm so exhausted. And so I remember going back, and there was a moment when we had just received communion, and we were just sitting in the pew and praying, and the priest went and said, peace be to the church. And I will never forget it. This young girl walked up to me, and she tapped me on my shoulder, and she said, peace be with you. And there was this amazing sense of God that I got in that moment. And I looked at my friend with tears in my eyes, and I said, I think that was just an angel. And that night, I went home, and I sat in my friend's car, and I cried for 3 hours. And when I was done crying, then I went home, and I remember going to the bathroom, and I said to God in the mirror that I just needed some direction. I was tired of living like this. I was tired of struggling, and I wanted a new life. I wanted whatever it was that He had for me. And so I went to bed that night, and the next morning when I woke up, it was this feeling of peace. And it was like God had cut the cord of attachment that I had had in my marriage. And so I spent the next weekend going back over all of the scriptures that I felt were holding up my marriage before. And what I found was that those same scriptures, they had completely new meaning for me in that weekend. And I spent the whole weekend in my Bible and praying and just discerning what was going to be the right decision for me. But I was finally at peace after 2 years of struggling and fighting and being in my emotions on a daily basis. And that last day, I was praying beside my bed, and I felt this need to get in my Bible again. So I had started reading in the book of Psalms, and then I just felt an urgency to get back on my knees and pray. Well, while I was praying, there was a fan in my room, and all of a sudden I started to hear the pages of my Bible flipping, and I thought, oh, that's kind of funny, it's just the fan. So I kept praying, and then when I heard the pages of my Bible turning again, it was like something had happened, and I felt this urgency to open my Bible again. And on that third day, after praying for the weekend, I saw a scripture. It was out of Ruth. It was 1:1, I believe. And it was saying, may you rest in the home of another husband. And I will never forget that moment, because regardless of whether that's the right verse or whatever, I know what that scripture said to me. And it was just a moment of clarity from God. And so that Sunday, I went to church, and there were a few women that were at my church that had been helping me through that season. And I remember I walked up to them and I said, So I decided that I wanted to get a divorce, and I said, but I'm actually happy. And one of them actually told me that she was happy for what was to happen. She was happy that God had brought that into my life. Now, let me tell you something. Divorce in the church was very rough for me. When I was going through my actual divorce, the judgments and the way that I got looked at was very upsetting. It made me feel not welcomed anymore. And what I wanted to share was that I had spent 2 years with God. I had spent 2 years discerning that decision and making the decision. And when I had made that decision, I was at peace with God in my heart. And I knew that at that moment in my life that I was making the right decision. And the judgment that I felt from other people, I understand that there's a lot of people that have never been through that. But what I want to share is that, yes, that was something that in the church we see as something that is upsetting, but there is a lot of people out there that are hurting through that season, and they do not need to be judged. They need to be comforted during that time. Yes, they need to be led in the Lord, and they need to be close to Him during that time, and they need other people around them. That is such a season of despair. And the scripture about God bringing people into one flesh, that is so important, because when you actually go through a divorce, it literally feels like your flesh is being ripped in two. And the pain that is associated with that is no joke. And I don't discourage anybody from getting married. I think it's one of the most beautiful sacraments. I think it's one of the most beautiful ideas, a covenant of two people coming together for life. It is so beautiful. But what I want people to know is that sometimes the situations that bring about divorce is not always about the person that actually is involved in it. Sometimes those actions were based off of somebody else, or even on our own accord, on mistakes that we've made. But that doesn't mean that those people aren't suffering just like everybody else. And I just wanted to share that, because I ended up going to a different church for a little while after that, but it took me a really long time after that to actually step foot in a church, because it was this feeling like every time I walked in there, even if nobody knew, there was something like I felt like it was on the outside of me then. And I just wanted to share how I felt about this, because there were a lot of people that were there for me during that time. And there was a lot of people within the church, and not everybody was judgmental. But I just wanted to share how hard of a season that was, and that feeling of being alone and feeling like you are the only one that is suffering like that, when there are probably a whole bunch of people, but we just don't talk about it. And I just wanted to share how rough that season was for me, and how even making that decision was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in my life. And I'm so thankful that God was there to walk with me through that and to bring me into a good place. And I spent the next year in a divorce battling in court. But what I will tell you is that I learned a lot of amazing lessons out of it. I learned how to be strong in myself. I learned how to trust God in a different way than I had in the prior season. This time, God and I were working as a team, and He was becoming justice, and I was learning what God's justice meant. And it didn't mean that the other person was being harmed or whatever, because God is always looking out for everybody in every situation. He's not just looking out for me. And I also have to keep that in mind in those situations. And so while I went through my divorce, God asked me to be gracious in the processions. And I also prayed for him, regardless of what the situation was. And it was difficult for me. And I did go through a lot of emotions. I went through anger. I went through the waiting period because I thought it was going to be one and done and not have to worry about it. And that went on for a year. But again, I grew in that. I learned a lot about myself. I learned things that I can use to help other people that go through that season. And I learned God's love in a different way. And God taught me how to be confident in myself. The last day that I was in processions for my divorce, I remember being in the elevator. And right before that, I was so excited. It was the first time that I was going to court, and I was actually excited. And there was a man that was in the elevator, and he was like, "You're very excited today." And I said, "Yeah, I'm actually going to complete this today." And I got in the elevator, and he's like, "You have a very blessed day." And when I got to that next elevator and I prayed as I got up to that next floor to go into the processions, I remember I prayed to God and I asked God, "What am I supposed to say today? How is this supposed to go?" And I felt it in my spirit. And it was God saying, "You know what to do." And it was this amazing confidence that for once I really felt like I knew what was going to happen. And I really felt like I could be confident enough to do that. And the best part was that I knew that God, Jesus, was right next to me. And He was going to be there. And He was going to make sure that I got through it. And that I was going to accomplish and bring back all of the things that I needed for my season. And I will say that at the end of that procession, both of us were in a place where we were no longer fighting. We could cooperate for our son, and both people ended up with a fair deal at the end. And I am so thankful for that because even today, a few years later, it's beautiful to know that I was gracious during that time and I allowed God to fight for me, and how gracious He was on the other end of that. He took care of everything, and everything was just, and it was fair for everybody involved. And there, of course, was going to be disputes, but it was always civil. And I'm so blessed by what Jesus has done and what He did during that season. And so I just want to share that. I wanted to share what it was like for me. During that season, because it wasn't an easy season. And there was a lot of things that were revealed within my heart too, in the way that I judged other people or the way that I felt judged. That was not on those other people. That was a projection of how I felt about myself during that season. But I just want people to know that that projection is going on, and that had people come and surrounded me during that time, maybe I wouldn't have felt that way. Or maybe I would have not judged other people. And so I just want to leave you with that tonight. And I hope you have a very blessed day.